You see it all the time. People talking about how the economy is slowing down. The news tells us that a recession is coming or that we're already in one. Businesses adjust their forecasts. People start to worry about job security, spending less, saving more. Maybe your paycheck feels a little tighter. You might even notice fewer new jobs being posted or see more closing down signs on your daily commute. But do you ever stop and think, why does this happen? Why does the economy suddenly go from growth to decline? It feels inevitable, but is it? And if it happens so often, how come we don't see it coming? Most people think of recessions like the weather. They're just these inevitable storms. They come, they go. We hear about it from economists, politicians, even friends and family. Recessions happen because of some external shock. Maybe the stock market crashes, or consumer confidence dips, or something goes wrong in the global supply chain. We're taught that recessions are caused by unpredictable forces. Some external shock, like an unforeseen crisis, pushes everything into decline. It's not something that can be controlled or prevented, just something that happens and has to be weathered. It feels obvious that economies can't always keep growing. So we brace ourselves, make a few adjustments, and wait for things to go back to normal. But that explanation doesn't fully hold. Recessions don't just happen because of random, external factors. There's a system behind it. A set of mechanics invisible to most of us that quietly drives this process. And when you understand it, the next time a recession hits, you might realize something important. It wasn't a surprise. It was, in a way, inevitable. It's not that there's no external shock, but the underlying process is more predictable than it first seems. Recessions are not some wild anomaly. They're part of how the economy functions, even if we don't always notice it until it's too late. Let's slow this down and look at what's really happening behind the scenes. At its core, the economy is a system, a web of interactions between individuals, businesses, and governments. Each part of this system has specific incentives and goals, and their actions influence one another in ways that shape the larger economic landscape. Individuals want stable jobs, higher wages, and opportunities to grow wealth. Businesses are driven by the need to expand, increase profits, and invest in future growth. Governments, meanwhile, aim to maintain social order, ensure national security, and provide for the public good, all while managing economic stability. The whole system is built on the flow of money. Money is the lifeblood that keeps everything moving. It's what enables people to buy goods and services, businesses to pay workers, and governments to fund essential services. But this flow of money is not a simple one-way street. It moves in multiple directions and can flow in and out of the economy through various channels like spending, saving, lending, borrowing, and investing. This flow of money creates opportunities, creates wealth, and creates jobs. When money flows freely, businesses expand, workers find jobs, and consumers continue spending. Everything seems balanced and the economy feels healthy. People feel confident, businesses feel optimistic, and growth continues. But money doesn't always flow in this ideal, endless way. The flow of money is subject to various forces that can influence how much circulates and where it goes. This is where things start to get more complicated. Imagine the economy as a large circulatory system. When the system is healthy, money moves smoothly, like blood through arteries. The exchange of goods, services, and labor keeps the system alive and vibrant. People spend their earnings, businesses pay wages, and profits are reinvested in growth. In this ideal flow, everything keeps moving. Money doesn't just sit stagnant. It moves and multiplies. But, like any system, there's a limit to how much money can flow. And when the flow starts to shift in problematic ways, problems begin to arise. For example, too much spending can start to lead to inflation. When consumers spend money faster than businesses can produce goods and services to meet demand, prices rise. The value of money itself starts to decline. Inflation erodes purchasing power, and over time, people need more money to buy the same goods. This can create an environment of rising costs and economic instability, where even the most basic goods become more expensive. On the flip side, too much borrowing can also cause problems. When individuals or businesses borrow more than they can reasonably repay, they accumulate debt. This debt is fine as long as people are able to continue earning and paying off their obligations. However, if economic conditions change, say, through rising interest rates, servicing that debt becomes more difficult. For businesses, too much debt means they have to divert resources away from growth and investment just to cover loan repayments. For individuals, too much debt means less disposable income, fewer purchases, and a higher risk of financial distress. For businesses, too much debt means they have to divert resources away from growth and investment just to cover loan repayments. For individuals, too much debt means less disposable income, fewer purchases, and a higher risk of financial distress. As the economy reaches a point where the flow of money becomes unsustainable, the system starts to slow down. The mechanism that once created growth, spending, borrowing, lending, starts to turn in on itself. When money becomes more expensive because of higher interest rates, for example, or more difficult to access, because of tighter lending standards or reduced confidence, the economy contracts. Businesses are no longer able to expand the way they once did. They pull back on hiring, stop investing in new projects, or even lay off workers. Consumers, in turn, stop spending. They become more cautious, more conservative with their money, and less confident about their future prospects. As businesses start cutting back on their operations, the workers they lay off have less money to spend. This reduces the demand for goods and services even further, and the economy continues to contract. Fewer people spending means fewer people working, and fewer people working means even less spending. This feedback loop of reduced spending, increased caution, and tighter economic conditions is how the economy enters a slowdown and eventually a recession. But this process doesn't happen overnight. The slowdown is not a sudden crash, nor is it the result of a single dramatic event. It takes time. It's the result of small, gradual shifts, feedback loops, and compounding changes that accumulate over months or even years. The pressure builds slowly, often without anyone realizing it until it reaches a breaking point. Changes in interest rates, shifts in consumer confidence, and fluctuations in debt levels don't immediately push the economy into a recession. They slowly chip away at growth, and eventually, that accumulated pressure triggers a downturn. A recession is essentially the economy's way of correcting itself after this gradual slowing down. It's a reset, a necessary process for restoring balance. When the system can no longer function the way it once did, it needs to pause, step back, and reorganize. A recession creates space for a new equilibrium to emerge. This reset doesn't happen because of any single event. Instead, it's the natural result of a system that has been pushing too far, too fast, and has now reached a point where it needs to adjust. Consider the broader implications of a recession. It's a point in time when the flow of money slows down and businesses and consumers begin to react to the constraints they now face. But this slowdown isn't catastrophic for everyone. For some, it's a time to readjust, reassess, and find new ways to navigate the economic landscape. For others, it may feel like a crisis, because the way money moves through the economy has fundamentally shifted. The interesting thing about this process is that it's predictable in the sense that it's part of how economies work. The economy can't grow indefinitely without consequences. Eventually, growth has to be tempered, or it risks creating unsustainable imbalances. Ultimately, a recession is not an external disaster. It's a part of the system's own rhythm, an inevitable correction in the face of economic pressures that have been building up for some time. The economy, like any system, moves through cycles. Understanding this process helps us see why things behave the way they do, and why a recession is just one phase in the ongoing evolution of the economic system. Now, let's revisit the original belief. It makes sense why we believe recessions come out of nowhere. The headlines, the political rhetoric, the suddenness of it all, it feels like these economic downturns are inevitable. A sudden collapse in one part of the economy and everything else follows. A financial crash, a sudden spike in unemployment, or a massive dip in stock prices. These moments feel like they're triggered by something external and unexpected. The stories we hear from experts often focus on these big shock events. A crisis in the banking sector, or a global supply chain failure, or an unforeseen political decision. The language around recessions tends to reflect this suddenness. We talk about them like storms, a looming threat we're all trying to prepare for, but never sure exactly when it will hit. It's as though the whole economy is minding its business one day, and then, without warning, a huge shockwave ripples through everything. And just like that, everything starts to unravel. So it feels like external shocks are always the cause. Something hits the system, and the economy goes from steady to chaotic. If you're on the outside looking in, it can seem as though this breakdown is sudden, unpredictable, and outside of anyone's control. And if you find yourself in the middle of it, maybe you feel like you've been blindsided. But now you can see why this belief doesn't capture the full picture. Yes, recessions are often triggered by specific events, but those events don't create recessions. They don't come out of nowhere, unbidden. Instead, these triggers are like the final push in a system that has already been slowing down for a while. It's more like an accumulated pressure reaching a tipping point, rather than an isolated random collapse. Imagine it like water slowly rising in a dam. The structure itself is still standing, everything seems stable, but there's a gradual buildup of water behind the walls. Eventually, a heavy rainstorm or a crack in the dam might push things over the edge, and suddenly there's a flood. But that flood wasn't caused by the rainstorm alone. It was the result of the steadily rising water and the dam's inability to handle any more stress. The rainstorm wasn't the cause, it was the final event in a long process. In the case of an economic slowdown, recessions happen because the system has been slowing down for a while, whether it's because of inflation, debt accumulation, tightening credit, or shifts in business behavior. These changes don't appear overnight, they unfold gradually. Over time, confidence begins to wane. Businesses pull back on investments. Individuals slow down their spending, and the flow of money through the economy starts to tighten. This isn't chaos, it's the natural progression of a system moving toward a point where it needs to correct itself. This is where the misunderstanding about recessions comes in. We often see the external shock, the event that seems to trigger the recession, and focus on that moment as the cause. But in reality, it's just a signal. The system has already been weakened, and the shock is just the moment when things start to break down. Recessions don't surprise the system. They're not abrupt, unpredictable disruptions. They're a reset. The economy has been building up tension, and the moment the system can't continue functioning the way it has, it takes a step back. This reset is necessary for the economy to regain balance. It's the system working as it was designed to, adjusting, recalibrating, and finding a new equilibrium. When you start to see this, you realize that while recessions feel sudden, they're really the result of much slower, often invisible processes. They don't happen because of a single moment, but because the system has been slowly heading toward a point of correction. Understanding this doesn't take away the difficulty of experiencing a recession, but it does give you a clearer sense of how it fits into the larger picture of the economy's natural rhythms. Now think about how this affects everyday decisions. For one, understanding that recessions are a natural part of the system, even if they feel like unpredictable events, can change how you interpret economic news. If the economy is slowing down, it's not just because of an isolated problem. It's part of an ongoing process. People often look at recessions as a personal failure. Businesses closing, jobs lost, money tight. But when you understand how the system works, you can see that these downturns don't signify an individual's failure. They're part of the broader economic cycle. It's the system's way of correcting itself. The way people interpret success and failure changes too. During a boom, success feels effortless. Everything is moving in the right direction. But during a slowdown, things feel harder, and the temptation is to panic, to feel like you're losing ground, but a recession isn't the end. It's just the necessary pause before the system starts moving again. The way we respond to money, to debt, and to investing is deeply shaped by these cycles. How we prepare for downturns, how we think about growth and loss, and how we make our financial decisions during boom times. All of it is influenced by our understanding of these economic rhythms. Once you see it this way, a lot of everyday financial behavior starts to make more sense. Recessions are part of the rhythm of the economy. They're not the result of random chaos. They're a natural outcome of the system's internal mechanics. The economy moves, it grows, and it slows down. And when you recognize this, you can see how everything from interest rates to layoffs to spending habits are all part of this ongoing process. Nothing dramatic changes, but how you understand it does.